They erased Earth, buried its voice, and sealed away its memory, thinking that silence was victory. But across centuries and systems, humanity returned not with war, but with memory that no empire could suppress. Now the stars themselves remember, and what Earth has become is more powerful than anyone imagined. In the 53rd cycle of the Galactic Accord, the consensus declared Sector Rho 19 permanently closed. No explanation was offered. No inquiry permitted. Just silence. At first, it seemed like a bureaucratic footnote, a forgotten outpost, a failed colonial attempt. But soon, whisper networks among deep traders and rogue archivists started circulating old scans. Ruins. Machines. A planet that bled light from its core. And then, one word. Terran. It sent a ripple through the hidden parts of the galaxy. The places where maps blurred and the Council's voice grew faint. Because that word hadn't been spoken in open communication for over 300 years. Earth was gone. Dead. Collapsed under its own instability during the Fracture Era, or so the story went. A cautionary myth about unchecked expansion, violent dualism, cultural entropy. No one ever verified. No one ever wanted to. But then came the broadcast. Not from Earth. From beyond it. It was intercepted on a salvage rig orbiting a dying moon in Quadrant N6. No source traceable. No recognizable signature. Just a fractured data packet that reassembled itself in the rig's outdated linguistic system. The message was only 7 words. Silence is over. We are still here. It shouldn't have been possible. Earth's final broadcast ended in chaos. Static and flame. A world eating itself. But the message was clear. And soon, it was everywhere. The Accord panicked. It always had contingency protocols for military resurgence, for rogue AI uprisings, for bioterror ecologies. But not for this. Not for ghosts. A defunct species returning with no flag, no army, and no request for re-entry, only presence. Sensor logs began picking up anomalies in ancient Terran coordinates. Gravity ripples with strange harmonic decay. Non-standard emissions, not hostile, just wrong. Like physics was being written in a dialect it hadn't heard in centuries. And then the first ship appeared. It didn't match any Accord registry. Its hull was scorched black, asymmetrical, fractal-layered. It had no weapons. No insignia. Just a single word burned into the metal in a dozen overlapping languages. Return. Admiral Sarvith of the Council's silent fleet ordered an intercept. 2 pursuit cruisers jumped to Sector Rho 19. They never came back. Not destroyed. Just gone. Comms went dark. Telemetry scattered. No final message. No distress call. Just one final burst of passive signal, faint and decaying. Contact made. Memory holds. The Council tried to suppress it. But it was too late. In the gray-zoned archives beneath Council command, a junior analyst named Valine traced a pattern in the transmission decay. It wasn't noise. It was code. Layered into the signal was a recursive emotional imprint, a Terran invention banned cycles ago. It didn't transmit language. It transmitted grief. The last moments of an entire generation encoded into waveform. Dying cities. Failed transmissions. A child calling out to empty sky. Orbiting satellites watching as the planet fell silent, but never turning away. When Valine presented her findings, she was removed from service. Her file marked, emotionally compromised. Her notes were locked in a vault. But others saw, and others remembered. On outpost stations and free world ports, old Terran symbology began to reappear. A shattered world with an open eye. An arrow looping back through a star. The symbol Delta with broken wings. In one phrase, we endured the forgetting. It wasn't propaganda. It was reminder. And that made it powerful. On the edge of Accord space, a convoy of refugee vessels, long ignored, drifting without support, was approached by an unknown ship. Scans showed nothing. Hull unreadable. ID signature impossible. The refugees prepared to flee. But the ship broadcasted a short audio burst. It was music. Old Earth music. A single violin, playing in vacuum. And then, supplies were dropped. Medical kits. Water processors. Food fabricators tuned for over 200 species. The ship departed without a word. But its signal remained on loop. You didn't need to speak our name. We remembered yours. The Accord declared martial containment in all systems within 8 jumps of the Rho sector. But containment doesn't work on ideas. And by now, the Terrans weren't just a threat. They were a myth reborn. In a council chamber of cold marble and colder law, a vote was held. Not to attack. To erase again. To reinforce the doctrine that had kept Earth's memory buried for over 300 years. One voice opposed. Not loudly. Not with speeches. Just a single sentence. If they survive the silence, what makes you think another one will stop them? The voice was ignored. But that sentence was recorded. And it leaked. The phrase spread like a quiet virus. Not through war. Through remembrance. If they survive the silence, what makes you think another one will stop them? It was painted across bulkheads and outer ring markets. whispered in council waiting lines, inked into skin an old Earth script by species who had never seen the human homeworld, but now carried its absence like a secret flame. The Accord tried countermeasures, re-education streams, mimetic purges, historical revision injections. But everywhere their reach faltered, something strange followed. Shipwrecks repaired with impossible materials. Stations rebooted from dead systems. Dying biospheres coaxed back to breath. And always the same signature. A single glyph, carved not to be noticed, but to be found. Delta. In the smog-thick depths of Thalen Drift, scavenger crews picked up fragments from a council black site. A data core. Cracked open by time, not force. Inside, footage. Grainy, unclassified, decades old. Earth's last sky. Oceans black with fire. Atmosphere flaring in sheets. A city falling into itself while a voice over radio whispered coordinates, not to flee, but to remember where it fell. The scavengers sold the feed to an archivist circle, and within days it had gone viral. Not in networks. In hearts. Because the footage ended not with death, but with a face. Tired. Burned. Smiling. Saying, we weren't made to last. But we made sure our memory would. The Council finally launched Operation Quiet Horizon, a direct interdiction fleet aimed at locating and re-isolating the Rho anomaly. 10 cruisers. 6 dreadnoughts. A command corps built for long-range anti-existential warfare. They reached Sector Rho, 19 and 13 jumps. They found nothing. Just a dead world. Cracked crust. Magnetic collapse. No signs of life. Except one structure. A tower. For kilometers tall. Black stone fused with metal. Gravity warping scaffolds that bent light away from sensors. At its base, a door. Unsealed. They sent a drone. Inside were no traps. No weapons. Only names. Endless walls covered in engraved names. Some alien. Most human. A silent archive of the forgotten, the ones who died during the collapse, and the ones who tried to stop it. And one inscription at the center, in bright silver. If you found this, it means we forgave you. But we didn't forget. The Council pulled the fleet back. Not because of risk, but because for the first time in centuries, they had no script for what this was. No enemies. No demands. Just presence. And memory. In an Outer Ring Accord University, a young lecturer, species unrecorded, name redacted, published a paper titled Cultural Persistence Through Engineered Absence, the Terran Phenomenon. It was banned, which only made it spread faster. The thesis was clear. Earth had not survived the collapse by resisting destruction. It had survived by learning how to be remembered without permission. And now, it was returning as narrative. As a gravitational anchor in a galaxy adrift. The memory ships followed. Silent. Unarmed. Self-powered. Each one smaller than a cruiser, larger than a shuttle. Shaped like broken wings or prisms of rusted light. They entered planetary orbitals without hailing frequencies. No weapons visible. No threats made. They just waited. Sometimes, they opened. When they did, they revealed libraries. Not archives of conquest or strategy, but survival. Journals. Songs. Letters. Simulations of last moments. The feeling of losing atmosphere. The act of making a choice to stay behind so someone else might escape. The memory of not being heard. Species who walked inside these ships came out changed. Not loyal. Not converted. Just awake. On Elarithrex, a council world once home to 2 billion, an earthquake threatened the capital district. 3 emergency towers collapsed. Local systems jammed. No response from orbit. Until a signal flared, not from council rescue, but from an old, unregistered band. We heard you fall. Within minutes, automated drones appeared from nowhere. Terran design. They lifted debris. Stabilized pressure domes. Evacuated wounded. The council responded with fury. Declared the drones illegal. But the citizens of Elari didn't dismantle them. They repainted them. Added symbols of their own. Marks of survival. And on the side of one drone, someone wrote in careful script. We don't care who sent them. We care that they came. At the center of council space, someone leaked the final transmission of Earth's planetary command during collapse. It wasn't militaristic. It wasn't defiant. It was a lullaby. A mother singing to her child in a burning sky, hoping they made it off-world. No name given. No hope promised. Just the voice. And a phrase at the end. If they find you, tell them we tried. The galaxy went quiet again. But this time, the silence was listening. And far out, past the rim, a shadow moved, not aggressive. Just familiar. Humanity had not come back to reclaim. It had come back to finish remembering itself, and to let the galaxy watch. The galaxy had known many forms of dominance. Technological supremacy. Fleet escalation. Psychic resonance control. But what it hadn't expected, what it had no immune system for, was moral persistence. Humanity had returned not as a military force, but as a memory that refused to be erased again. And memory spreads. Not through weapons. but through recognition. The Council launched psychological interference campaigns, floods of programmed dreams, soft retcon signals, engineered nostalgia for cleaner histories. But in the refugee slums of Naraxi Outpost, none of it mattered. Because the only thing people remembered was this. 3 days before their food systems failed, a ship had appeared. No flag, no demands, just supplies. And a recorded message played once in perfect silence. We never needed to rule, just to return. Soon, the memory ships no longer needed to arrive. Their architecture, fractal, intuitive, and semi-sentient, began replicating in sympathetic environments. Someone on a backwater planet dreams of shelter. A delta seed in orbit activates. It lands. It opens. And inside, warmth. Food. Heat. Books. Silence. But not loneliness. Because everything inside whispers, you are not forgotten. The Accord reclassified Delta activity as class null existential hazard. But they had no fleet capable of countering compassion at scale. Their attempts to shut down broadcast points failed, not because of Terran defenses, but because the people protected them. On one station, when enforcers arrived, the docking bay was lined with children, each one holding a recording, a different story, a voice, a lullaby, a cry, a choice. Together, they played them on open comms. It wasn't defiance. It was invitation. And the enforcers couldn't do it. They walked away. Somewhere on a dead moon once charted as Earth's outer colony, researchers uncovered something embedded in the bedrock. A satellite core, still partially functional. They recovered the memory crystal inside. It contained one thing, a letter, to no one in particular. If you ever return to where we vanished, leave something behind. Not to prove you were here, but so no one ever forgets we were. They left the letter in the open and added their names to the stone. More species began defecting not to Earth. Not to a cause, but to a way of remembering. What had been broken, what had been done, and what should never be allowed again. Entire education systems rewrote their curriculums, not because they were told, but because they felt ashamed of what they'd accepted as truth. In the floating cities of Vishtren, a festival was held, not for victory, for echo. Candles lit for every culture lost to abandonment. Stories spoken of the days no one came. And at the center of the crowd, a human walked, quiet, alone, until someone reached out, then another. And soon, the human wasn't alone. And no one asked why they had returned. They asked why they had waited so long. The final act of the council came not as a command, but as a confession, broadcasted in every system. They said, "We silenced Earth to protect the future, but the future came looking for us anyway, and it carried the voices we tried to forget." Then they resigned. As a body, as an idea. In the following cycles, no new empire rose. No new seat of power. Instead, there were circles, shared memory vaults, consensus nodes where history was not rewritten, but relived. Every time a planet joined, it sent not resources, not soldiers, but a single file. What we lost. Back on Earth, the sky remained empty. No fleets, no traffic, just stars. And on the ground, in a garden grown where a city once burned, a small child looked up and asked, "Did they hear us?" A voice, old, soft, answered, "No, but they feel us now." In the vacuum between stars, meaning is scarce. But after the Delta return, it became clear, some silences speak louder than sound. Drifting across trade routes, in the dark where sensor sweeps find nothing, Delta probes began to sing. Not data, not commands, but questions. Broadcasted across all comm layers, in languages both dead and dreamed. What do you regret? What did they make you forget? If someone remembered you, would it be enough? And across every known species, one truth emerged. There were more answers than there were governments. At the edge of known space, in a region once sealed off due to navigational instability, something old awakened. Not Terran, not Accord. An architecture older than either. Blackstone, spiraled metal, a kind of thinking gravity that bent time with memory. When it rose, it didn't speak. It reflected. And what it reflected was pain. Species who thought they had buried their ghosts felt them crawl back through time. Delta ships were the only ones that approached. They didn't analyze. They knelt. And the structure, whatever it was, allowed them entry. Later, it was renamed the Mirror That Listens. Inside, they found no weapons. Only a room. Empty, save for a chair and a single Terran phrase carved into the floor. "We sat here first. Now it's your turn." No one knows who placed it there. But species across a dozen systems sent emissaries to sit. And every single one came back different. Not brainwashed. Not broken. Just aware of something vast. A past denied, now returned. In the academic citadel of Velov Prime, Terran memory codexes were translated into 28,000 dialects. Students began to study Terran behavior not as anomaly, but as adaptation. They called it cognitive reclamation through crisis. But the Terrans never used that term. They just called it survival. And the difference mattered. On Station Arden 4, a crisis struck, a gravity well destabilized, threatening to collapse the lower deck habitats. Accord engineers hesitated. Protocol delayed action pending full permission chain. But one Delta vessel was nearby. It didn't wait. It acted, stabilized the field, extracted residents, rebooted collapsed architecture. When questioned later by Accord High Tribunal, the Delta response was simple. They were going to die. We were there. That was enough. That phrase became law on over 70 independent systems. That was enough. Not as justification, as ethics. Because the old galaxy asked, who has authority? The new one asked, who has presence? Earth never demanded a seat. It never asked for restitution. It rebuilt, not cities, but meaning. Orbiting the broken crust were now over 47 memory spheres, autonomous satellites broadcasting shared emotional records. They didn't defend Earth. They preserved its story. Each one carried a different piece of its death and a different promise of what it chose to become. They were called witnesses, and every year, a new one was born. The first joint planetary coalition, composed of 30 species, didn't meet in the Accord chamber. They met on Earth, on an island once drowned in acid rain, now healed by time and effort. There, under an open sky, each delegate shared their species' worst moment, and the humans listened. No judgment, no corrections, just acknowledgement. Because they knew, better than anyone, that the first step to healing is being seen. That meeting was never recorded. But it didn't have to be. Because within a year, 300 more systems requested entry into what came to be called the Remnant Compact. Not a new accord, not a new order, just a quiet agreement. We will remember each other, so none of us disappears again. The Remnant Compact grew not in size, but in gravity. It didn't claim systems. It attracted them. Like a collapsed star of shared trauma, it drew in those who had been forgotten, overwritten, orphaned by history. And the closer they came, the more they changed. Not to become Terran, but to become whole. Aboard the memory vessel Dawnfold 9, now a roving academy ship, a Caltheran student asked her human instructor, "Why didn't you fight us?" The instructor paused, then answered, "We did, just not with weapons. We fought with presence, until you couldn't ignore it." The student tilted her head, confused. "But why didn't you hate us?" The human only smiled, sad and soft. "Because if we did, you'd never listen." On the colony world Yunkesh, a new monument was unveiled. Not to Earth, to those who stayed behind. Not heroes, not saints, just people who didn't make it. A voice looped through the wind towers of the square. Not everyone survived, but everyone mattered. No plaque bore a single Terran name, but every visitor left with the same feeling. Recognition. On the rim, where exploration still brushed against unknown dark, a transmission came from beyond any known route. Distorted, ancient, pre-accord, Terran in rhythm, not origin. It carried a simple message. We remember the stars before your maps. Delta ships responded, not with force, with answers. They carried emissaries and dreams. And for the first time in centuries, the edge of the galaxy whispered back. Back on Earth, in the garden cities built upon silence and ruin, children were taught no anthem. Instead, they were taught questions. What did your ancestors lose? What do you carry for them? What will you leave that remembers you truly? The last question was written above every school. How will you make your absence echo? At the galactic heart, once the domain of the council, a new forum was built. No dais, no central throne, just concentric circles, and a rule. No voice louder than memory. Delegates came not with decrees, but with confessions. Worlds that had abandoned their own. Nations that had rewritten facts. Individuals who once pressed the erasure button when Earth called for help. No one judged, but all listened, because the future was being shaped by the act of finally telling the truth. One station, formerly an Accord prison for political undesirables, was converted into a listening archive, not to document events, to document emotion, regret, hope, guilt, dreams. It broadcasted nothing, but every ship that passed nearby reported strange peace, like something heavy had been set down. And in orbit around old Earth, a single satellite blinked for the first time in centuries. Once, it had been forgotten. Its orbit decayed, its solar array shredded, but something in the Delta relay reactivated it. Its final log played, a child's voice, reading from a book, a bedtime story, and the last line said, "And in the end, they remembered each other." So they were never truly lost. From the edge of the galaxy, something ancient stirred, not hostile, not Terran, not Accord. It had watched. For eons, it had seen empires rise, collapse, forget. But now it saw something new. A civilization teaching others not how to dominate, but how to persist. Through memory. through presence, through truth. And for the first time in its long, cold existence, it sent a signal. Show us what it means to be known. Earth answered, not with ships, with a single line, broadcast from every memory station in perfect unison. Come, we remember for all of us. They gathered where no maps reached, at the breach between old space and the deep unknown, where light thinned and stars grew sparse. The oldest species arrived first, drifting bioconstructs, dreamborn civilizations carried in glass minds, stellar organisms that pulsed across magnetic tides. And then came the Terrans, not in war form, in witness form. Each vessel carried archives, not weapons, not flags, stories. Some brought sorrow, others awe. None of them brought command, because presence was enough. The gathering wasn't a summit. It was a convergence of silence. Each attending race shared one thing, a loss they could no longer speak about in their own words. And the Terrans? They translated, not into language, into feeling. Using their memory engines, the Delta vessels transformed grief into shared echoes, light, sound, time loops, emotion weaves. And in that space, every civilization finally understood. Earth had not returned to be restored. Earth had returned to make sure no one else vanished like they had. On the 9th rotation of the gathering, a decision was made, not by vote, not by order, but by consensus of feeling. They would build a ring, a structure not to defend or divide, but to anchor meaning. A living monument, carved from the star bones of ancient systems, laced with Terran archive crystal and wired into the emotional sublayer of the galactic net. They named it the Remembering Ring. It orbited no planet. It belonged to no world. But its existence changed the map of the stars. Because now, any species could come and leave behind a truth they had never dared say aloud. Not for judgment, for joining. On Earth, the old cities remained untouched. Not for nostalgia, for witness. Every ruin told a story. Every fracture was a scar that shaped the voice of tomorrow. Children were brought not to see greatness, but to understand cost. And beside them stood elders, Terran and otherwise, repeating the vow etched in every doorway of the new garden schools. We were not made perfect. We were made to endure, so others may begin again. One last vessel left Earth. The last silence. It carried no crew, only a single archive. Inside was every voice ever recovered from Earth's collapse, layered together, unfiltered, raw. The ship launched into the dark, aimed beyond charted space. Its course was unchangeable, its power endless, its purpose singular, to find those who had not yet been found. And when it reached the edge, it would speak only once. You are not forgotten. In the halls of the Remembering Ring, near the Terran wing, a simple plaque was placed. It did not say Earth. It did not say human. It simply said, they survived extinction by refusing to stop telling the truth. And beside it, the symbol burned into 1,000,000,000 hearts. Delta, not the mark of power, not a brand of empire. A reminder that something fragile, broken, grieving, and flawed can still be enough to change the stars.